Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to introduce biology, and we'll talk about what is biology and what makes an organism living. So, for your warm up, imagine a meteor from outer space crashed outside Douglas High School, and we all, as a class, go out to see it. And we see that the meteor is covered in a strange green slime. In the question dialog box that will pop up, please write down 2 to 3 ways that you could tell if that green slime was a living thing. What is biology? Biology is the study of life. The prefix bio means life, and ology is study of. Living things are known as organisms. Anything that is alive can be called an organism. In this class, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about cells. And that is because all living things, or all organisms, are made of cells. Different organisms can be made of one cell and be unicellular. Other organisms can be made of many cells or multicellular. The cell is the most basic structure, the smallest structure that can perform all of the characteristics of life, which we will talk about in a moment. All living things, all organisms, also have to have genetic material. And in organisms, in cells, that genetic material is DNA. DNA is a molecule that codes for our genes, and our genes give instructions for cells. So it's our genes that determine what type of organism will be. We'll talk more later on this year about DNA and how DNA works, how it's able to give instructions for cells. But for now, what you need to know is that every living thing, every cell, has DNA. All living things share the following characteristics. And if you remember the acronym RARE-HOG, you'll remember all the characteristics of living things. All living things respond to their environment. They all have evolutionary adaptations. They're all able to reproduce. They use energy. They maintain something called homeostasis. They are ordered or organized, and they grow and develop. We are going to talk about and give examples of each of these 7 different characteristics of life. First, all organisms respond to their environment. Something that is happening in the environment surrounding the organism or the cell is called a stimulus. It's something to react to. And all organisms respond to that stimuli. So, for example, we have this plant called a Venus flytrap. It is trapping that dragonfly. It responds to the stimulus of the dragonfly landing on the surface of the plant, and its response is to snap shut to trap that dragonfly. Another example might be if you were to put your hand on a hot stove. The stimulus would be the hot stove, and you would react to it by immediately pulling your hand away from that hot stove. All organisms also share evolutionary adaptations that help them survive. For example, camouflage, like this seahorse here, it's camouflaged in with the coral. Or our opposable thumbs in humans is another evolutionary adaptation. Adaptations, they come from a process called natural selection. And later on this year, we will talk more about natural selection and how it creates adaptations. The one thing I want to say about an adaptation is it is something that organisms are born with. So, like the seahorse is going to be born with the ability to camouflage, and humans are born with opposable thumbs. This term gets easily confused with response to stimuli because people think of adapting as, adjusting to one's environment, but that is really responding to stimuli in your environment. Adaptations are things that you are born with that help you to survive. Next, all organisms have to reproduce. All organisms produce offspring, and you can think of offspring as like babies. Cells divide in order to create new cells. And when cells divide, they pass their DNA onto their offspring. They pass on their set of genetic instructions to their babies. There are two types of reproduction that organisms can do. The first is sexual reproduction. This involves two parents, a male and a female. The male produces a sperm cell and the female produces an egg cell. And the egg and sperm will combine together in order to produce a genetically unique offspring. And half of the DNA from that offspring will come from each parent. So we have this lion cub here, and the female lion and the male lion. This lion cub's DNA is 50% from the female and 50% from the male. So this lion cub's DNA is slightly different than uh, either one of its parents. It's a combination of both. So it makes the offspring genetically unique. For example, you might look a little bit like either one of your biological parents, but you don't look identical. The other way organisms can reproduce is through asexual reproduction. And in this example, one parent creates identical clones of itself. So in this case, we have a single parent cell, and that cell divides in order to create two new daughter cells. Now, with asexual reproduction, the DNA is exactly the same. It is a clone of itself. So, asexual reproduction creates identical offspring. Sexual reproduction creates unique offspring. Next, we have energy. All organisms have to take in energy and transform it in order to perform life's activities. So, animals will eat in order to gain their energy. Plants will take energy from the sun and use it to do photosynthesis. And then energy is transformed. The energy from our food is transformed in order to create movement within our muscle cells. Next is homeostasis. Homeostasis, in a nutshell, is balance within the body. All organisms have to maintain internal conditions. Our insides are pretty stable compared to the external environment. For example, our body temperature is about 98.6 degrees normally, where the outside temperature can change, especially here in New England. It'll be 50 one day and 75 the next day. But our body temperatures, as long as we are healthy, remains a constant 98.6 degrees. Another example is water and salt balance in the body. If you eat a bag of really salty potato chips, after a little while, you're probably going to feel thirsty because you have way too much salt in your body and you need to dilute it down with some water. Or if you drink a lot of water, You're going to have too much water in your body, and you'll get rid of that extra water by using the bathroom. So you try to maintain that balance in the body. We will be talking a lot more about how organisms are able to maintain homeostasis throughout the course of the year. Next is order or organization. Life is organized into a hierarchy, different levels of organization, and different parts work together in order to create different levels of the hierarchy. And so these are the different levels that I was talking about in the previous slide. The smallest unit of matter is the atom. And if you want to get super complicated, you can talk about the different parts of the atom that come together in order to create that small atom. But this is just one single atom that's put in here. If you take a bunch of atoms together, you get a molecule. For example, this whole thing here is a molecule of DNA. If you take a bunch of molecules together, you get something called an organelle. And an organelle is a part of a cell. For example, the nucleus. If you take a bunch of organelles together, you get a cell. You can see the different parts come together to build more and more complex structures. This is what I mean by there is a hierarchy of organization. You start small and you get larger and larger and larger. The cell is the smallest structure that meets all of the 7 characteristics of life that we're going to talk about. A single atom can't maintain homeostasis, can't reproduce, but the cell can. If you take a bunch of cells together, you get tissue. For example, you get nervous tissue. If you take a bunch of tissues and put them together, you get an organ. For example, the brain. If you take several organs together, you get an organ system. For example, your nervous system, which includes things like brains and spinal cords. And then we have the organism. We take all the different organ systems together, like your nervous system, your digestive system, your circulatory system, and put them together, you get an organism. And the hierarchy continues. These are the more ecological levels of organization. And we're going to start off next week talking about these levels specifically. But if we have our single organism, like this pelican, if we take all of the pelicans that live in an area, we get a population. If we take all of the living things, like the pelicans, the seagulls, all the fish in the ocean, all the seaweed, all the grass, that is the community. So all the living organisms in an area is a community. And we can build even further. If we take all the living things and all the non-living things, we get an ecosystem. And then every place on Earth that can support life is known as the biosphere. Finally, all organisms grow and develop. They get bigger and they acquire new traits or behaviors over time. So, for example, puberty in humans, or butterfly metamorphosis. It starts as a caterpillar and then goes through a chrysalis and then becomes a butterfly. For your exit ticket, please tell me what characteristics of life you can observe in this picture. Name as many as you can.